The alarm clock buzzed at 4 a.m., a sharp, metallic bite in the stagnant room. Arthur leaned over the bed, watching the steady, shallow rise and fall of his son's chest. The medical monitor blinked in the dark, a rhythmic pulse of artificial life. He pressed a thumb against the boy's forehead, felt the lingering heat, and stepped back. Outside, the air was a blade of ice. He walked the empty streets, his boots striking the pavement with a heavy, solitary sound that nobody heard. At the school gates, he pulled the massive iron key from his pocket. The lock groaned, yielding to his touch, and the heavy barrier swung inward. He stood in the shadows as the first light bled into the sky. Students arrived in waves, their voices high and frantic, their eyes darting over him as if he were part of the brickwork. They brushed past his shoulders, smelling of fresh morning air and indifference. He moved to the edge of the playground, retreating into the shade of the portico. He was the first one here and the last one seen. He gripped the chain-link fence, watching the school wake up. An invisible fixture in a world that never looked his way. By 2 p.m., the playground transformed into a violent roar of laughter and shouting. Arthur stood near the perimeter fence, his eyes tracking the chaotic movement of the children. He shifted his weight, his boots crunching rhythmically on the dry gravel. Then, his focus locked onto a figure near the oak tree. A man stood apart, leaning heavily against the trunk. His eyes were not on the students, nor the games, nor the noise. He was staring, unblinking, at the main classroom block. A massive, bulging backpack sat at his feet, appearing heavy enough to sink into the dirt. Arthur stopped, scanning the yard. He watched the man reach down and pull the straps of the bag tight, a sudden, deliberate gesture of preparation. The air seemed to thin. Arthur walked toward the tree, his pace slow, his eyes narrowed on the man's hands. The stranger shifted, his posture hardening as he sensed the approach. He gripped the bag handles with white knuckles. The background laughter faded into a dull, distant hum in Arthur's ears. He was no longer watching the playground. He was watching a fuse that had already been lit. Arthur turned his back on the playground and sprinted toward the faculty office. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched his heavy, uneven breathing. He bypassed the common area where teachers sat, their eyes flicking toward him with open disdain. He reached the principal's door and rapped his knuckles against the wood, sharp and insistent. The door opened an inch. The principal looked out, his face a mask of annoyance, his eyes immediately dropping to Arthur's boots before checking his gold watch. He sighed, a sound of profound boredom, and started to push the door shut. Arthur slammed his palm against the frame, holding the barrier open. He leaned in, his face inches from the principal's, and began to speak in a rapid, low whisper. He pointed back toward the playground, his finger trembling with intensity. The principal tried to step past him, but Arthur shifted his weight, locking his body in the threshold. He did not blink. He did not apologize. He forced the man to look at him, to see the terror behind his eyes. The principal hesitated, finally registering the genuine weight of the warning. With a sharp, reluctant movement, he turned back to his desk and reached for the telephone. The sound arrived before the sight. A high-pitched, oscillating wail shattered the afternoon silence, tearing through the playground air. Within seconds, cruisers swerved onto the grass, tires churning up mud as they cut off the escape route. Officers leaped from the vehicles, weapons drawn, moving with practiced, lethal precision. They swarmed the man by the oak tree before he could take a single step. He was forced down, his face pressed into the dirt, his arms jerked behind his back. One officer kicked the heavy backpack away, and it landed on its side, the zipper bursting open upon impact. A glint of cold steel caught the harsh sunlight. A cache of weapons lay exposed on the grass, barrels and magazines gleaming in the light. The playground went deathly silent. The roar of laughter vanished, replaced by a vacuum of sound. Teachers stood frozen near the classroom blocks, their faces drained of all color, eyes locked on the pile of metal. Parents began to arrive, their footsteps frantic on the pavement, clutching their children close. The air felt heavy, stagnant, as the reality of the moment settled over the school grounds. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The threat was real. It was here, and it had been stopped just before the trigger could be pulled. Arthur stepped back, letting the crowd of reporters and parents swallow the scene. He turned his back on the flashing lights and began to walk. The next morning, his face occupied every screen in the city. By noon, representatives from the school board arrived at his doorstep. They held a document with a heavy seal. One official stepped forward and pressed a contract into his hands, promising full medical coverage for his son, followed by a formal letter of apology. Arthur took the papers, his grip firm. He closed the door, cutting off the outside world, and knelt beside the bed. His son looked up, a bright, genuine smile touching his lips. The medical monitor continued its steady, rhythmic pulse, but the weight that had pressed down on the room for months finally lifted. Arthur sat in the chair, legs stretched out, watching the sunlight move across the floor. He was no longer the man lingering in the corners of the school gates. He had stood between the darkness and the light, and for the first time in years, the path ahead was clear. The silence in the apartment was no longer empty. It was peaceful. He closed his eyes and breathed, knowing the debt of his son's health was paid in full.